This is Ken Jarecke, and today we're talking pictures with Joe McNally. Joe is a legend in this business. He's done everything for pretty much everybody. He's a last of his kind. He was the last staff photographer for Life magazine, which is pretty special in itself. I'm so excited to talk to Joe today. Hi, Joe.
Hey Ken, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
Both of us are contemporaries. We both have made lots of exposures and been around for a long time. So I'm honored to be on the podcast. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming on. I just you know, I think we should start off. I mean, everybody knows Joe McNally, the Nikon guru, the small light guru, the author of, you probably sold over, I don't know how many millions of books, but you started out pretty humbly in the almost, well, tell us about that, your newspaper days when you started out.
Yeah, humble would be the right way to describe it. I was hired as a copy boy at the New York Daily News. So it gives you some perspective on the business. When I was hired as a copy boy, which is very far away from being a photographer, there were 57 staff photographers at the New York Daily News.
Wow.
Now there are precisely 0. So a long road has been traveled for sure. But it was New York's picture newspaper. It was tabloid journalism. I went from Syracuse University, where I was sort of steeped in the legends of Steichen and Stieglitz and the photo classics, and all of a sudden thrown into this hurly-burly of New York City, chasing celebrities down the block outside of Studio 54, trying to make an extra buck and freelance a picture to the UPI. So it was a very humble start, very humbling start to come to New York and all of a sudden, be surrounded by, amazing photographers. Danny Farrell was my mentor at the Daily News, a phenomenal photographer, and becoming acquainted with people who really knew what they were doing, both on the editing side and the shooting side. And I was this green kid. I didn't even know how much I didn't know at that point. I was lucky to have survived.
So you started up as a copy boy. I thought you somehow started in the dark room. You kind of finessed your way into the dark room. Did you move from copy to, how'd you get into the photo side?
Yeah, they knew the new copy kid was interested in photography. I made that clear. It was a union shop. So
Right.
One guy comes out, another guy comes in, so Mike Lipak, who went on to become the boss at the Daily News, was a studio apprentice. That was the darkroom. That was the name for the darkroom technician that you're referring to. So he went out on the street as a photographer, and then I came into the studio as an apprentice. I was still a boy in newspaper parlance, because you weren't a man until you went out on the street with a camera in hand. So I was a boy in the studio. I was a boy out in the newsroom. But, I was a step closer to the photographic process. I ran Versamat machines, captioned, pictures, cleaned up whatever mess the lab was in, all that sort of, background stuff that you need to keep a big newspaper operation running. I mean, I had 57 photographers, all of them, not every day, but there's a lot of film getting pumped in there that, so there was a lot of technical work to be done just to keep the place running.
So did you soup everything through the Versamat?
Everything dry. Yep.
Wow.
I mean, the Versamat machines, as you might recall, were the mulching machines of black and white processing back then. It was not unusual to have one of the machines just chew up a photographer's, set of frames. You'd go into the back of the machine. It was dark. You'd pop open the cassette. You'd tape it to a plastic leader, and you'd run it into the machine. And 3 minutes later, you'd have a dry, set of black and white negs, strip them into a glassine. And then the editors at the Daily News were very good at editing in reverse. Essentially, they would project the negs onto a screen, and they could tell sharpness and tonality and all of that. And they would edit right off the neg on a projected image, and then it would get dumped into the print room. And then the pneumatic tube system would be the system of choice to get it out to the newsroom. Roll up the prints into a plexiglass tube and pop it into a pneumatic system, and it would shoot out into the newsroom. Very old.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating. Well, we kind of knew that, we did know that, but a lot of people don't have never heard of such a thing. I mean, the Versamat you referenced is, I always called it the Versa Crunch, because you never knew what was going to happen to that film, as you said.
Yeah.
It was, you'd have to build a dark room around the machine, and you'd be in the dark, like you said, to load it, and then you'd go outside and have a cup of coffee while the film was coming out. But it ran at, I mean, close to 110 degrees, and that's why it had the 3-minute. It was really cooking that film in a hurry.
Yes, and we had 3 of them in there, so the dark room got very warm. And good Lord, it was not, it was very limited, but they were they were determined to remain automated. Wet souping was just not possible under deadline. So dry to dry, boom, about 3-4 minutes, and you were right. You would literally kind of cook the film.
And at what point did you get to start printing? I'm sure they had like journeyman printers or something in the union shop. How did that work? Did you actually get to print?
I could print after hours. I had my own paper, but I could use the chemistry. You had to be careful about it because it was union printers, and nobody wanted to look around and see, some apprentice maybe stepping on toes or anything like that, or crossing a job line, because obviously it was a higher paid position than I was. So most of the staff was okay about the fact that the new kid would be printing in there sometimes at night. It was wonderful to have a darkroom back, because I lived in an SRO hotel on the Upper West Side, a single room occupancy hotel. And it was a, can I say shithole on this podcast?
Yeah, you absolutely can. That's what they were.
And I built a little very rough darkroom, but it was awful. It was not serviceable at all. And I was paying $210 a month for this. And I was taking home, as a copy boy, I was taking home $109 a week. I always remember that figure for some reason. And I was 76. City was broke. City was filthy, but I actually really loved it. It was charismatic and tawdry and beautiful all at once.
Yeah, when I look back at the old pictures from that time, or see, a film like The Deuce on HBO,
yeah,
I don't read that city's gone. The city that we knew, that's gone. That was
absolutely. Times Square is basically Disney North.
right.
Which, I mean, there's merits to that as well. I mean, Wall Street woke the city up, and there's a lot more money and all of that. The desperation factor is gone, but I do miss it. There were characters, and those characters were allowed to thrive.
Right.
Now, economically, unless you're a major player, you can't even think about living in the city.
No. So when did you started, I suppose, stringing for a UPI on your own time at that point?
I did. One of the most fortuitous things that happened was the great newspaper strike of 1978, I think it was. And we went on strike. It was a pressman strike. We went on strike for 80 or 90 days, somewhere in that neighborhood. And during that time, Danny Farrell signed on with a little newspaper that started. These little newspapers started growing up around New York, using guild members, and publishers of places like a Penny Saver thought, well, I can do a daily paper. I can fill in this void.
Right. And
it was pretty successful. We were called the City News. We ran for about 3 months. And Danny Farrell, I called him up and I said, Danny, what do you need? He said, kid, I need everything. I got no library. I got nothing. So I went out and I shot that first few days of the strike. I don't even remember going back to my apartment. I shot anything I could get my hands on. And Danny told me he'd pay me $50 a picture.
Nice.
By the end of the first 3 days of the paper being published, he owed me like $250. And he looked at me, he goes, look, I'm going to put you on staff, And so I got a staff photography job for $250 a week, which was fine. I threw myself at it. And the beauty of it was Danny did some horse trading with UPI. That's how I got to the attention of UPI, because UPI offered to process all of our film for free, as long as they had access to our feed. So they could use any of our pictures for free, and they would soup them. Danny said, done deal. And so Larry DeSantis, who was on the desk at UPI at the time, took a look at me, and oh man, he was not happy with me oftentimes. Let's put it that way. But he taught me, you know, and it was during that time that I really grew as a photographer. And then when I came back into the Daily News when the strike was over, I got pushed out of the studio because of the economics, and that's when I quit and I went as a full-time freelancer in '78.
78. Wow. You've been walking that road for a long time. And what's amazing is you've continued to adapt and learn as you've gone, and you've thrived. So just, if we can go back, I don't want to spend too much time on the old days, but there has to be some lessons that you learned back then that you still practice every day today.
Sure. I mean, I always, unfortunately, nowadays this option is not available to young photographers. But for many years, as I'm sure you did, you would counsel young photographers the best training in the world is to work for a wire service or a newspaper. It teaches you to be fast on your feet, adaptable, shoot lots of different things, and don't get into a rut. You know, you couldn't afford to, you know. So I always look back on that time as having taught me the notion of being versatile. And that was a very valuable thing that has stayed with me my whole career, to be sure. And then, you know, after I kind of rattled around New York for a while, I got a job offer, an actual job offer as a staff photographer for ABC Television Network,
Oh,
which was this really weird duck of a job. I would shoot, you know, Ted Koppel at Nightline. Then I'd come back and I'd shoot Monday Night Football. Then I'd go into the studio and I'd shoot a still life of an Emmy. And then the next day I'd go up to All My Children and shoot Susan Lucci. And my boss just looked at me and says, we shoot Kodachrome, you know, and we light things. So figure it out. And that, I never assisted anybody. I just had to figure out lighting right then and there. And as I always say, it was thankfully a job where, you know, the still photographer carries no weight on a television set. And so they expected failure, and I routinely delivered on that expectation.
nice.
You know, but I learned color. It was 19, maybe 79-ish. And I started shooting Kodachrome in color. And I found my imagination kind of wrapped itself around color better than it did around a black and white daily news beat, you know? So that was a start for me. I did that job for about 18 months and then I quit. And then I really did go freelance into the magazine world.
So that was like 1980-ish when you started beating the pavement from magazine to magazine?
Yes. My first day of color magazine freelancing was the day Reagan was shot.
Wow.
You know, and I always remember being in a diner and I had a pager, a beeper, you know, and my beeper started going off like crazy. And it was my old boss at ABC. And he knew that I knew all the players. He goes, look, Reagan just got shot. Rune Arledge is directing traffic in the newsroom. Slide into the ABC newsroom, use your old ID and get me some stuff. And all of a sudden I was freelancing for him and he had to pay me $250 as a freelance day rate. Whereas before my paycheck at the end of the week was like $300 for 5 days. You know, I was like, okay, this freelancing thing could work out. So yeah, that was my very first day of freelancing for many, many years.
What'd your physical portfolio look at that time? I mean, did you do the slide tray route, or what did you print a portfolio?
Yes. When I first showed up at the Daily News, I had your typical black and white 11x14 bleed mounted portfolio in one of those strap cases. That was it. Then as I started to go into shooting transparencies, I'd troop around, a carousel tray. And most magazines, editors were very used to like, okay, take a carousel, pop it into their machine and take a look. So that was how you showed work at that time.
Yeah, the first time I went to New York to show my portfolio around, I went with like the newspaper portfolio like you described, and the magazine editors just looked at me like I was crazy, but you know, they were kind. But this idea you'd have 80 slots in your tray and you'd have to put it together, not only your best work, but this narrative that kind of showed what you were capable of, but made sense visually. That was like, that's like kind of a lost art, isn't it?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, you still have to pace your portfolio. You know, if you're, you know, in there's been situations I've gone into sort of a commercial setting for an ad job. I've had my portfolio on an iPad,
Right.
and the art director just does this, and that's a pacing situation to be sure. Now, I'm honestly not sure. I mean, you know, because I haven't shown a portfolio in many, many years. So, but back then, yes, the art of putting together your tray was an important one to know. You had to hook an editor, and you had to be disciplined. You know, at 80 slots, so you had to be disciplined about the fact, like, I don't really need to fill 80 slots. I haven't got 80 good pictures. You know, I got maybe 30 good pictures, and so you had to be disciplined about what you showed.
And then the thing was, you would work on that thing for a week or 2 weeks, and you'd get it just right, and you'd think you were there. And as soon as you showed it to the first editor, you'd immediately realize where you made a mistake or what shouldn't have been there. I mean, just,
Yeah.
it's like,
First time I showed a tray to Lowengarden,
yikes.
John at Life, I don't think he took his finger off the advance button. Um, it was like watching my stills as a movie. Um, and he did pause at one point. He stopped it and he looked at me and goes, Joe, you know I'm a fast looker, right? And then he started chewing through my slides again. All I could say was gulp, yes, oh, of course, yeah. And it was premature to see him, and I knew that. But, you know, I got a foot in the door. I was able to communicate with him after that. And eventually he did hire me some years down the pike. But he did pick up on something, though. That was John's very attuned visually, as you know. And at the end of it, he's looked at me and says, your journalism, you know, he goes, but there's a lot of energy in the stuff that you're lighting.
Nice.
So he picked up on that early in my career. And I thought, okay, all right, I do enjoy it. I like creating light on location. So this is something he picked up on. I should probably work on it, keep working on it, you know?
So, yeah, I mean, Lowengard, quick looker, a lot of those people were fast, and you'd think, you know, oh, geez, what have I done? But that was their job. They knew how to see real quick, like photographers, I guess. Um,
Sure.
so, what, I mean, did you start shooting a lot for Sports Illustrated at some point in that early time? I'm trying to remember.
I did, yes. I was lucky enough to get an assignment. My first assignment for SI was Bo Jackson, which was
Nice.
the year he ultimately won the Heisman. And I had a great time with Bo, a really good guy, in addition to being an incredible athlete. Um, and that kind of snapped up Barbara Henkel. You know, she kind of
Right.
looked at that, okay. And then she assigned me to what ultimately I think was maybe even the most fun story, if you could put it that way, I ever shot for SI, which was just a rambling piece on Indiana high school basketball. And it was
Nice.
based on The Miracle of Milan, which eventually became the movie Hoosiers.
Right.
So it ran as a large piece in SI, and I had fun. I just had a blast because I was a high school basketball player. I was a wannabe athlete, you know. But and and I also I remember saying to my editor, I said, you know, I had a rental car. I was by myself most of the time, driving around these high schools in Indiana, and really kind of rural Indiana. And I said, it's the only time I've ever actually made money on my time made per diem. You know, because they used to give us like this much money to eat, right? And I'm eating in a McDonald's in wherever Indiana, you know, and I'm like, okay, well, I actually have a little money left over.
Right. Right. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned Barbara Hinkle, because she went on to work in the Reagan White House as, I think, their main picture editor, and she was a DOP at Sports Illustrated. But she was she was one of my, just I got my first job from her, my first real magazine job, and they had the ability at Sports Illustrated to do that, to give kids, and I was a kid, you know, and I got into, her secretary, Gloria, is the one that got me in there. I made a trip to New York and I showed her that wire portfolio, and she said, you know, really, this is a color magazine, Ken. These are all black and white. But she was such a great influence, and she had the power to really boost careers. I mean, she certainly boosted mine, and she helped yours along.
Sure. Barbara was a good editor, solid. She was, you know, the focal point of a lot of pressure at Sports Illustrated, you know, and ultimately I think that factored into her segueing to the White House. But yes, she was open to young photographers, and she also had a hardcore group of really experienced photographers that she had, you know, she was wheeling and dealing with those all the time. I don't know how that job back in the day was actually possible for anybody. That was a tough job to be the DOP at Sports Illustrated.
It was a tough job, but she had a heck of a crew. I mean, she had some real. I mean, Andy Haight was. I mean, that guy was amazing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you've kind of got your foot into the magazine world now. When do you start? Bo Jackson's a big story. That's a big deal for a young photographer. When did things really start to gel, and you thought, you know what, I'm in this for the long haul?
Oh, I went to New York, Ken. I had no plan B. You know,
Right.
I was going to do this, and there were a lot of bumps to be sure. But by the time I started shooting for SI, I don't know. You must have known Ken Regan,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
Camera 5.
You were you with Camera 5?
Yes,
Oh,
I left ABC Television. Deborah Pierce was my editor at ABC Television, and she knew Ken for a long time, and she said, "See this kid."
right, right.
I mean, these are things that used to happen that I don't know if they still do. They must in their own way. It's just an updated version. Um, Johnny Roca, who was the at the New York Daily News, and I still are friends to this day. And after I quit my job at ABC, he called me up and said, "Let's go to Northern Ireland." I said,
Nice.
yeah, let's do it. Bobby Sands was about to die. He was in the H blocks in extremis at the end of his hunger strike. So I went to Northern Ireland. I let Ken know at Camera 5. I wasn't affiliated with the agency. And he said, "All right, okay, good. Do what you can. I'll see if I can get you some money." So he got me a guarantee from Newsweek, and he got me a guarantee from Bunta. Cool. So I shot in Northern Ireland for maybe 10 days. And then I dropped down to London, and ABC called me and said, "Look, we want you to photograph Peter Jennings." So I met Peter actually in Belfast, shot him there, got along with him, then went down to London to photograph him in the studios, all for ABC. They needed new material. While I'm photographing Jennings in London, the wires start cranking like crazy, and the Pope had been shot. And Jennings looked at me and said, "You want to go to Rome?" And I said, "Yeah." So I flew that night on Peter Jennings, a private jet with Peter Jennings and his producer, and he checked me into the Cavalieri Hilton on his credit card. I was a kid. I had like $50 and a burnt up MasterCard. And I called Ken. I said, "I got no money, but I'm in Rome." And he goes, "I'll wire you money and I'll get you jobs." And I spent the next 2 weeks in Rome on assignment for Bunta and Newsweek. And I came back from that and I had a freelance career rolling. It was total happenstance. So Ken factored very largely into my kind of segueing into magazines. And then I officially joined the agency, and he put me in front of People magazine and New York magazine and Forbes magazine. And then I just started shooting.
No, and that's it's not actually an uncommon story at that time when you get on the road and you can't get off the road because the jobs keep coming in and the opportunities keep coming in. And when you had an advocate back in New York, like an agent, I mean, it was just
Yeah.
amazing what would happen.
Well, look at you guys. I mean, the contact crew were some best photographers in the world, and you guys were just cranking. Bob was running the show, and you and Burnett and Chuck Fishman, you know, I mean, you guys were top of the game.
Well, I think, you know, and you mentioned Ken Regan, and he was a huge influence on me. I mean, I met him in '88, so a few years after that, and he was shooting the Seoul Olympics for Time, and I was kind of like the low man on the totem pole. But he was such a fascinating guy and so talented. And now people don't. I mean, he's got his one book, I think, All Access. We need to. I'll put that on the podcast, a link to that. But he's kind of the images he made and the relationships he had with people like whoever, Bob Dylan, Rolling Stones. I mean, he was a fascinating guy, and I mean, to be working with him, that was just a huge blessing, I imagine.
Absolutely. Ken was a straight shooter and a good photographer, and just a work ethic like you can't believe, you know. Um, and he controlled his own fate. I really admired that. He set up his own agency. He determined early in his career he wasn't going to get just knocked around by the vicissitudes of freelancing. He was going to take control, and he gathered, a good production team around him. And he had this amazing knack of remaining very close and intimate, really on an intimate level with personalities, like you indicate, Dylan, Mick Jagger, the Kennedy family. And because he protected their interests, they remained open to him. Hence the book All Access. They allowed those people allowed him into their lives because he was careful and circumspect about what he would release. And that was a marvelous gift that he had, that he could swing through people's lives, do good photography, and remain in their good graces.
And all this, it's interesting to me that all these opportunities that you were able to take advantage of was because of this vibrant competitive marketplace in the publishing world, whether it was taking advantage of a newspaper guild strike or going from Newsweek to Sports Illustrated and just getting on the plane. There was competition, and people were hungry for these images. And that's, I don't know if we have that today, but I kind of miss it.
Oh, I miss it absolutely. Not much money was changing hands. On a per assignment basis, we weren't making a lot of dough, but there was work.
Yeah.
And as you said, once you got on the road, sometimes you couldn't get off because there were people just continuing to assign you.
Yeah, nobody was getting rich. I mean, maybe Ken Regan got rich because he was a earner. He had he had he had a great machine going. But most of us, we were always kind of half broke, even though that we were working all the time, and it was okay.
Yeah, I mean the risks relative to the rewards were sort of commensurate. You could have some downtime and maybe not do so well, but then you'd get this raft of assignments and it would pump some life back into you. So, yeah, it was, as, the two of us are, mildly nostalgic here, but it was a simpler time. It was a handshake business. Now I think the contract at the National Geographic is like 20 pages long, and so, yeah, and you give your images to a magazine, they pay you, and then they'd use it and give it back to you. Then your agent would take it and sell it. It was a fairly simple process. And there was honor in it, to be sure. And there wasn't the considerations now, which are very steep, branding, rights, what you can do with a picture can be very limited, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that stuff back in the day was much more freewheeling. It was, I don't know, like a rock and roll tour maybe, as opposed to a organized business.
Yeah, I don't want to get in too nostalgic or talk about the good old days or anything like that, because I think we have plenty of good days left. But all I'm saying is that there was, like you said, the contracts. We might negotiate 60 days on a contract now and not get what we need and have to walk away from the job, when back then, like you said, it was, hey, you want to go to Rome, there's no contract there, it's just you're going.
Yeah.
And people stood up to, people honored the agreements they made over the phone, and it was all very straightforward. That's the only way you could do it back then. in the film era, I think. But
True.
at some
But
point, go ahead. Sorry.
well, I was just going to say, but I wouldn't trade it for what we have now, the digital technology, the speed of what we can do and how we can do it. I'm actually having more fun as a photographer now than I've ever had, So yeah, you weigh all things, I'm
Right.
glad I had that experience. I'm glad, for the industry the way it is now too.
Yeah, I never want to shoot film again. I'm sorry, my David Burnett, who's out there working it with the 4x5 every day. I have no desire to shoot film again. I found some film uh, in my freezer last weekend that I forgot it was there. It was in a separate freezer in another building, and I have nothing to do with it. I don't want to shoot it.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
tell me about Life magazine. Life magazine was a big deal to both of us.
Sure. Very much a goal, to try to shoot for that magazine. Guard was very tough. He was smart and tough, and I was very blessed. I was lucky that I came to his attention, and he gave me a job. I mean, he was the funnel really. When he had taken vacation, and Mel Scott assigned me to a job, and I thought I did a reasonable job with it. I thought it was okay, and John just trashed it. He killed the job, reassigned the entire thing to Theo Westenberger,
Ouch.
and I thought my career at Life magazine had started and stopped with one job. Then, like a month later, he called me and he said, "Command, I have a job that I think you're appropriate for." So I think what the deal was, he wanted to assign me first, and he also had a specific notion of what I might be good at. And he was absolutely right, because he assigned me to do something on the art scene on the Lower East Side of New York in the early 80s, which was this wild, place. People were creating art that a lot of it wasn't particularly worthwhile, but it was just strange and beautiful and crazy. And I just responded to it and he told me, he said, "Go ahead, just keep shooting." I was local, I wasn't spending much money. So I think he gave me like 15, 20 days to shoot that job. And it turned out relatively well. And then he kept assigning me. And he opened doors for a lot of us, I'm sure. We were all kind of quote unquote prisoners of transparency film. And John was a heavy advocate of using color neg. And it was one of the first jobs, I ever undertook in color, that I started shooting color neg, was for him, because he felt it was easier, had more leeway, etc. So I started shooting some color neg for him. So he was very formative, I think, for a lot of us in pushing the edges.
No, his name comes up all the time on this podcast, and it's he changed lives, and he was great at his job. He was a leader in the industry, not just because of his position, but because of his knowledge and his personality, I would say.
Sure. And teaming up with Mel Scott, who was just a gift to all photographers. Mel really had the photographers back, really cared deeply, always looked at your take with a great deal of care and respect, because he knew he had your career and your livelihood in his hands. And so the two of them were a powerful team.
Tell me about that East Village shoot. Who were some of the personalities who are, their pieces are selling for millions of dollars today? So go ahead and name drop.
Yeah, it was a wild scene. I photographed David Wojnarowicz, who tragically died of AIDS, but he was a major artist. He went on to become a major counterculture force in the world of art, and he was definitely like wild. We created kind of a tribal thing in one of the abandoned lots on the Lower East Side. We took a trash can, we set it on fire. He had his pieces all strewn all over this garbage. It was definitely, it was beautiful to approach artists working in that time and place, because they would be open for anything. Like, I forget her name, but there was one woman who was doing these heavy, big sculptures of pigs' heads. And she would get pigs from the local butcher, like an entire pig. And then she would do a casting of the pig. And so we went to the butcher, and I have her surrounded by all the butchers, and they've got pigs on their shoulders, dead pig carcasses, and they're all, I mean, you could suggest something that was like kind of off the charts a little bit, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, that'd be cool," So it was a perfect job on that level. Absolutely wonderful.
No, it was a wonderful time. It was the East Village was, like you said, it was crazy uh, and exciting and just liberating. It was wonderful. Um, so tell me about, so you started working a lot for National Geographic at about that time too. The thing you did on, was it flight or aviation? What was that was really when I think people started to realize, at least people like me, was like, this guy can do things with lights on location that most of us can't.
Oh, well, yeah, there's a lot of water under the bridge. I did start shooting for Geographic in the late 80s. I was all film based, and I did stories. I kind of became a little bit of a, I guess you could call it a problem solver or something for the Geographic, because there weren't that many photographers down there who used lights or wanted to. So I got certain thematic kinds of things, uh, science stories. I did
Right.
the sense of sight. I did the human brain. I did the limits of the human body, things like that. And then the aviation story you're referring to, that was later. That was the first all digital story ever shot
Oh,
for
wow.
Geographic, and it was the first time in their history they had ever shot a story without shooting a single frame of film. So that was a cover in 2003.
That was 2003. Gee
Yep.
whiz. I'm getting old. I'm getting mixed up. Well, let's go back then. Let's go back to the staff job at Life magazine, because you were the last man standing.
Sure. I shot for them freelance. I started freelancing for them in 84. I shot on a freelance basis right until the mid 90s. Dan Okrent became the managing editor, really good visually oriented managing editor, which was a rare commodity at Time Inc. And he came to me and he said, "I'd like to offer you a staff job. I'd like you to come on board." And I was a little bit leery. All the freelance life, that's something you get used to. But it was a good opportunity. I knew it wouldn't last forever. And certainly it did not. I was there for 3 years as their last staffer. And then, of course, managing editor change, magazine is tumbling downwards economically, and she just did a wide sweep through the staff, fired about 40% of the staff. I was one of them. But I did have a wonderful run there in that 3-year time, because the staff relationship gave me an opportunity to have a direct ear to the editor, or the editor's ear, like, I could speak to and sell a story, pitch a story, So I got a couple things done I probably could not have done as a freelancer.
No, it's what was the first Olympics preview you shot? Which Olympics was that for? Was
Well,
that
for
Atlanta?
yeah, that was 96 Atlanta. I took the clothes off the Olympic team, which was kind of a first. Now, of course, athletes are getting naked all the time. But back then it was scandalous. I ended up on the Today Show and Good Morning America. Oh my God, they're naked. I'm like, yeah, they're pretty good looking too.
Yeah.
If you had a body like that, you take your clothes off too. um, so yeah, it was a wonderful thing that I think was directly facilitated by having the staff status, because I could go to these athletes and say, "Look, I'm a staff photographer at Life magazine. Life is America's magazine. Nothing bad is going to happen to these pictures. I'm not shooting for a skin rag or anything like that. I'm not into eroticism here. I'm interested in the athletic body and how it reacts to sports." So, like a nude, we had a broad definition of a nude. I forget her name. Her first name is Linda, but she qualified as the marathoner that year. And as soon as she finished the Olympic trial as the winner of the Olympic trial female marathon, I whisked her away to a parking lot right next door to the finish line. I had a mattress on the floor and moving blankets and stuff. And she laid down on the mattress and she put her feet up on a railing that I had covered. and took her shoes off and socks, and I photographed the bottoms of her feet. That was a nude. I wanted to see what running 26.2 miles had done to her feet. And in fact, her feet were a mess. But then I also did a full length nude of Carl Lewis, and I did the water polo team, with their water polo balls and strategically placed, and Jackie Joyner Kersey, who's an amazing athlete, Gail Devers, all these athletes. Eventually it took a while to gain momentum, as any project does, but eventually, I got this compendium of Olympic bodies, and Life did a nice job running it.
Just nothing to do with the shoot, but was that on a square format? I'm trying to remember.
I shot a lot of square. I did shoot a lot of square on that, and I shot it mostly black and white.
It was all, yeah. I remember the black and white, and I remember it had this great. It wasn't necessarily erotic, but it was sexy, but it was tasteful, and it was a celebration of the athlete. Really, it was just it was artfully done. Lovely images. Everybody looked at that a lot. I mean, you had a couple of those things where everybody in the photo community was just like, have you seen it yet? And that's hard to do. That's a pretty jaded kind of photography community when everybody starts paying attention to one photographer's some piece they did. So that was one of them.
Yeah, it did well. I have to tip of the hat to Life that they went for it. They had, my editor looked at me and said, "You think you can talk these people out of their clothes?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I can do that." And they ran it well. So I was very blessed in that regard. I had great subjects, and it was the right magazine to do it for. I think gave a good display.
Was David Friend the DOP at that time?
He was, yes.
And then who was your editor?
Me, basically.
Oh, you didn't have Bobby or somebody was not.
Bobby was supporting it, but Bobby and I, we were friends, and she would just come in, and she had a very light touch as an editor. So, Bobby and I got along incredibly well. But I really cut, it was so personal to me that at the end of the day, I was the one who kind of did the final cut on the take. But Bobby was a huge cheerleader for the project. She was wonderful to work with. Tom Benkowski did a great job laying it out. And Dan, of course, Dan Okert was the overall, impetus. He allowed it to happen, which took guts as a managing editor, to spend that kind of money, have a photographer out there and risk, the idea of naked people in the magazine. It wasn't, we got a fair number of cancellations.
No, I'm sure. But, this is also the magazine that probably 40 years, 50 years before had run a photo essay on how to strip undress, how the newlywed is supposed to undress for her husband, things like this. So life did have, I mean, they could get a little scandalous, but certainly not in the 80s or 90s. They avoided all that kind of stuff.
Very much.
Can we look at these pictures? I haven't looked at these pictures you sent, but I really want to.
Sure, I can pull them up on a screen over here as well.
I got them. You should be able to see them as soon as I do this.
Okay. Oh, there they are. Yep.
So,
I mean, I sent you way too many. We can just pick a couple and talk about them, Ken. It's not, I raced through a bunch of stuff earlier today, thinking like, well, I'll give Ken a kind of a career selection.
Well, no, and I appreciate that because I think we talked earlier when you've had such a varied career where you've done everything really. So this is a ticker tape parade, and
yes, it's the return of the hostages right after Ray took office. This is the ticker tape parade. The hostages had landed a few days previous up in Stewart Air Force Base in upstate New York, and then they came down for a ticker tape parade. It was the end of the Iranian hostage crisis.
Wow, that's amazing. There's nothing like a ticker tape parade if you ever get the opportunity. That's a bucket list type of thing.
Yeah. Yep. So
Okay, so this was shot on digital, actually. This
it was
was,
shot with a Nikon D1X.
wow.
Yep.
What year
That
was
was,
this? 2003, you said?
yeah,
2002?
this would have been, let's see. Yeah, I believe I did shoot this in 2003. Yep.
It's just beautiful. It's just such a, I mean, it's, speaking of like something that they'd like to do in the East Village, that'd be an installation piece.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I guess I'll have to ask you, just briefly tell me how you possibly lit this thing. How many lights are involved?
There's two main lights. Two Profoto 7Bs, which was kind of the battery pack of record at the time, running through two horizontal strip lights that are I turned them horizontally so they're matching the flow of the wings, and they're
Nice.
camera left, camera right. And then the undercarriage light is 8 speed lights.
And so were you allowed to gaffer tape those onto the fuselage? What'd you do? The wings? How'd you
Uh,
do that?
I had
Are you hiding
rubberized.
them?
Yeah, I'm hiding them behind. There's two, like that front, the Pegasus symbol on the front wheel. There's
Right,
two lights in that compartment for the landing gear,
right.
and then there's 3 and 3 on the back flaps. And so I had these clamps for small flash, and they had rubber, kind of stoppers at the end of it, so I didn't damage the aircraft. And I just carefully would clamp them on, because the guys who are supervising these kinds of experimental aircraft, they're pretty particular.
Yeah, yeah, they're sticklers.
you know
It's just I mean, you're almost, it's kind of like that your two main lights are kind of hatchet lighting that, and you're kind of really sculpted it. It's just beautiful. I don't know. It was just
I got lucky with the sunrise for sure.
oh, it's a sunrise. Okay, yeah. I don't like shooting at sunrise because it's always the only thing the light can do is get worse.
Yeah,
So
it's
where
just
sunsets,
yep.
no, that's beautiful. So were you on board here?
Yes, yeah. I'm sitting in the back seat in the number 4 plane. Jerry Darren is my pilot, and JD was his call sign. And I flew twice with the Blue Angels in what they call the slot position, which is the number 4 plane.
That's got to be, speaking of bucket lists, that's got to be right up there, flying with those guys.
It's pretty cool. You can see we're pretty close. That's a wide lens.
Yeah,
So they're flying, tight and fast.
yeah, that's amazing. It's a nice picture. I really like it. So this is the cover of that issue.
Yep. 400 millimeter lens, D1X out on the tarmac. This is the F-22. There were only 5 of them flying at the time. They were in test rotation. So this one had just come off the assembly line at Marietta, the Lockheed facility down there, and it was about to take off and fly to Edwards Air Force Base.
We kind of talked about this a little bit before about, Life magazine was really the only magazine where you could get these Olympic athletes to pose, nude and stuff like that. And the power of these magazines at the time, whether it was Time, Life, National Geographic, you don't get this kind of access without that name behind you. And
True.
it's just, I think, it's just something that, I don't want to get political, but these magazines, they were kind of a touchstone, a cultural touchstone that everybody kind of uh, accepted as this is how things are. Life, National Geographic, everybody could kind of agree that what was in their pages was more or less what we were experiencing, the American experience, whatever it is. And that's a lot of that access, that power of that name came from that being able to cross cultural or political divides. And I don't think we have that now. That's my political statement of the day. Sorry.
Sure. No, magazines have lost a lot of influence and power. That's for sure.
Yeah. So this is the Vomit Comet, as they.
Yes, this is over in Russia. This is the zero G plane
Oh,
flying over Star City.
Nice.
So that's Russian cosmonauts and American astronauts training together.
So what are the practical implications of shooting in, in the with the Blue Angels or on this plane when, you know, accidents could happen?
Well, this was one of those things. It was Russia. And to get onto this plane, I took 10,000 US dollars cash and stuffed it into the hand of my Russian arranger at Star City. And he signaled the pilots. And as soon as he had that cash in his pocket, they started the engines and we went flying, even though it was the middle of an ice storm. And the pilots flew the whole mission on instruments. And the American astronauts told me later, they said, we would have scrubbed this mission back home. you know. But that was kind of the working at Star City, and actually Russia in general at that time was cash and carry as a journalist.
Sure. I was actually thinking more about the vomit part of the comet.
Oh yeah, I emphasize that. I threw up so much on this thing. Ken, it was awful. I threw up so much. I unzipped my flight suit and I was throwing up into my shirt.
Lovely.
And it was, because you don't want all that stuff flying around in the weightless. So here I'm still getting sick, but I'm completely dry heaving because there's nothing left in my stomach. So Mike Lopez Alegria, an American astronaut, is bungee corded to the floor. And as I float to the ceiling, he grabs my legs and stabilizes me. And I'm shooting this with Phil Flash. This is Kodachrome. And I'm shooting Phil Flash.
Nice.
It was absolutely nuts.
That's amazing. And it's a heck of a picture. I mean, that's kind of this idea that, listen, we're there to make the picture, and all that other stuff we can worry about, the soiled clothes, we can worry about that later. But right now we have this responsibility really to make the picture. I just love that.
You do. I mean, they came up to me at the end of it, and one of the astronauts said, "Joe, you just got a lot of respect because you just did something very Russian."
Oh, as long as you didn't have the borscht the night before, I think we'll be good.
Oh, Jesus. Yep.
This is lovely. It's just beautiful light.
Yeah, she was on the cover of Point magazine. She was a young lady who got plucked from the chorus by Peter Martins at the City Ballet to play the role of Juliet. And she's just a lovely young dancer. And I've shot dance pretty much throughout my career.
Are you on the stage here, or what's that background? What is it?
No, it was a studio. It was a photo studio, and the art director wanted me to break up the background a little bit. I didn't have much to work with. It was just an empty soundstage. So I took ballet bars and I made a jumble, kind of a cross-hatching pattern. I just kind of laid them on top of one another, vertical, or every sort of which way. And then I pumped a light with a blue gel through it, and that had produced some of the cross-hatching in the background.
I love that. And so I just want to geek out a little bit here. This light is so soft and so beautiful. You didn't do that with small heads, did you?
No, this is big flash. This is a 6-foot octa with a skip off the floor as a beauty fill. And then there's a wind machine as well.
Lovely. This is Fan.
Yeah, Kim Fook.
Yeah, Kim Fook.
Yeah, Kim Fook, the Napalm Girl.
Right.
All those years later, Nick Ut made the original Pulitzer picture, and she's just a lovely lady, absolutely lovely lady.
Yeah, I've never had the chance to meet her, but I made sure that all our kids read Nick's book and her book on just the whole thing. I mean, it's an amazing story.
Yeah,
amazing. She's in Canada.
Lives in Canada. Yep. She and her husband. She's got 2 kids. This was her second. Yep. Thomas. This is Thomas when he was a baby.
So this is like 10, 15 years ago. Was this for life? Do I remember that correctly?
This was for life. It was a wonderful assignment. It was very informative, really, because, Ken, they sent me back to shoot the subjects of 4 Pulitzer Prize winning photographs.
Oh.
And, you know, when you're the subject of a Pulitzer, it's probably not a very good day, right? You
No.
know, so as it was for Kim, and then I photographed the young lady who was in John Philo's famous Kent State picture. She was grieving and weeping over the body of the dead student at Kent State. I photographed her. And then I photographed a lawyer activist in Boston, an African-American lawyer. Stan Foreman was a hell of a photographer at the Boston Globe, won the Pulitzer 2 years in a row. And his second Pulitzer was a racist mob spearing this lawyer with an American flag on a pole as he tried to get into Boston City Hall coming up the steps. And I went and photographed him as well. Still a lawyer, still practicing law in Boston.
Those are three pretty good, earth-shattering, even images. Nice.
Sure, you remember them. You don't even have to see them. You have them in your head.
Absolutely. Oh, so Sean, I got to say that Sean's parents told me about this shoot.
Oh my goodness.
They were not happy. I'm going to just say, and that's her dad. Her dad is like under her at the time, or something. Yeah.
There was a storm coming in. Like everything that could have gone wrong was about to go wrong. Yeah.
Oh.
What are you gonna do? You know.
No, you got to get a picture. And when you're in Iowa, when you're outside of Des Moines, you gotta get a cornfield in there.
Yeah.
I love this. I spent a lot of time. It's a long story. I spent probably 2 weeks with her, and right before the story ran, People magazine bought Angelina Jolie's and Brad Pitt's twins photos, exclusive photos for like, $18 million or something. So I got 5 single pages with no spreads for my Sean Johnson story. I'm not complaining.
Yeah, that would go on for sure.
Who's this? Is this Leonard Bernstein? Who's
Leonard
this?
Bernstein? Yeah. When, on the occasion of his I guess this was his 80th birthday, and he was a character. I loved him. He was really a very temperamental man, and he could be irascible and difficult, but he was really a genius.
Yeah. I mean, his music is going to be, it'll never be forgotten, really.
No.
Was this some story where you were doing octarians? Did you do the Lounge Singer at the same time? Was that the story?
No, this story was for life. It was completely devoted to Lenny.
Okay.
It was entering in his upon the occasion of his birthday. He was being celebrated in the classical music world, so we had access to him, and I spent a couple days with him, and I ended up photographing him a number of times during the course of his life. And he was, as I say, difficult but wonderful at the same time.
Right. You pop a little balanced strobe into there, or not?
Oh yeah, I think there's maybe 3 lights. You can see one of them if you look above the piano on the far right hand. You see the shade is drawn. There's an umbrella up there.
Oh, nice. I thought there was only one light, and I thought it was just barely a kiss at that. So you really mimicked that natural light. Lovely. Well done. Well. Oh, this was that one year they did this sport in the Olympics, the trampoline or whatever.
Yep. Yeah, this was for 2000. It was New Metal Sports. I shot it, thankfully for Sports Illustrated and for Jimmy Colton, who's a dear friend, and Jimmy called me up and said, we want something highly evolved and technically oriented for these new sports. And I said, cool, okay, we can do this.
So tell me, just I think I've actually read a piece on this and how you did it, but just very quickly for people out there that have no idea how this was done.
Sure. It's one piece of film shot on location, no compositing or retouching. It was shot in an airport hangar in Lubbock, Texas. All 9 trampolines are actually there. I lit the set. It took a week to build the set, and I took balloons, and because I didn't have the team, so I had helium balloons attached to each of the trampolines at about the height where the trampolinist would get, and then I lit the balloons because they were my only way of testing. And then there's a combination of strobe and pretty heavy duty movie lights on scissor lifts. And I was shooting an RZ 2.25, which was really easy to double expose. So I just let the film stay, and I would cock the shutter 2 or 3 times at different positions for the trampolinist. And so I'd get a repeating flash kind of an effect 2 or 3 times.
And so your ambient, though, you had enough ambient that I imagine you could see, but also just the right amount to balance out with the strobe for the streaks, the blur.
Yes. I was dragging my shutter, and then of course the strobe would freeze them.
Nice. Where's this at?
This is in Tanzania, a story for the Geographic on site. It's a small flash picture. My interpreter is holding a small flash in the doorway as this woman who is incredibly courageous, blind, forage for food and roots and plants that she would then mix into a stew and use for spice and for vegetation for food. And I followed her through the fields and photographed her, and then we came back to her home, and she did the fine tuning with her hands. She would sort out what she was looking for with her feet, pick it, and then come back with her bowl and start to work her way through the vegetation she had just gathered. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, really. What year was this?
This would have been, this was my first cover story for the Geographic, so it would have been like 91-ish, 91, 92.
So just to stress that this is on film, it's not, you don't have Photoshop to, you got to get this right in the camera is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so the Kodachrome 64.
Nice. That's my favorite. It's beautiful. What do we have here?
World's largest binocular telescope, top of Mount Graham. I'm shooting it from a 175-foot boom crane outside of this building, which is a pretty big building because it's a massive scientific installation. And the whole interior is lit, probably about 30,000, 25,000, somewhere in there, watt seconds of big Speedotron and Pro Photo units inside, and then I'm triggering it with a radio from my perch on this crane.
Is there any light? Is that just ambient on the surface of the building?
Yes, the fading sun is behind the I'm looking west here, so right. I have the darkening eastern sky behind me. And it's right. Just a little shimmer off of the exterior of the building. Luckily, that exterior is kind of like reflective. It's sure. Kind of luminish. So
just give me an idea. How many people? How many man hours did it take to even get this ready to shoot? Did you get there in the morning and shoot it?
Yeah, we got there about 6 a.m. We were shooting by sunset. We packed up and we drove off the mountain the following morning about 3 a.m.
That's a long day. That's a lot of work.
It was a lot of work. It really was. I think I had 3 assistants on this.
Yeah, it's just a lot of elbow grease, if nothing else. Where's this at?
Horse Hollow, Texas. What at that time was the largest wind farm in the United States. I don't know if that status has changed, but it's a sunset picture, big lens from a high-wing Cessna.
No, really?
Yep.
I just assumed you somehow got on the top of one of those things.
Nope, I'm flying in a Cessna, and the pilot is banking hard. I'm yelling, "We got to get the sun, got to get the sun." So he's making really tight turns, trying to give me as many cracks at these things as I possibly could get.
And this is like a 400 2.8.
And 200 to 400, yeah, racked out to 400.
So tell me, just shooting from an airplane's never any. I mean, even like shooting from that man lift, shooting the binocular telescope. I was thinking to myself, that's got to be moving a little bit on you with that ambient light. How do you pull this off and still have this quality?
Yeah, digital. I mean, it was, digital is just an amazing thing. I mean, this, I'm autofocusing here, and I'm shooting. I think this is like ISO 1600. You know,
That's
um,
crazy.
and fast shutter speed. So, like, digital has facilitated all of us in terms of the reach that we can have. Try shooting this in the 70s on push triacs, man. Not going to work so well.
No, in the film era, you have to be on a stage. The best you could do is like a hot air balloon. if you, if you
Yeah.
weren't on one of those towers. I mean,
Yeah.
that's amazing. It's really nice, really nice. This
Well,
first inauguration.
this was, yes, first inauguration. You know, um, Personal aside that you'll recognize, that's Howard Baker back there with a Leica Flex.
Is it?
Yep.
Yeah, he was he was always a good one. I mean, you could talk to him anytime just because you could talk photography. He's
Yep. He
just
loved
a
photography.
yeah,
And I always looked at this picture and said, son of a gun, he's got like an exclusive. Look at that.
yeah. He's working
Yeah.
it. So that's this is on film. This is from far away. This is a six. This I'm guessing a six. That's a long throw.
Yeah, that's a six. It's a handheld six, actually.
No,
Ectochrome.
really?
Yeah. I was an ABC photographer at this time. It's 1980. And
Oh,
my credential allowed me to slide in with the TV cameraman,
that's
but they
right.
wouldn't
Yeah,
let me set up a tripod
yeah.
because it would impede their swing with their camera. So I had to be light and fast and hand hold this.
So you were on like a single camera, pool camera spot, which normally there wouldn't be a still photographer there, pretty
Exactly.
much. Yeah, that's a great angle. I love it. That's a hard thing to shoot.
Yeah, they don't. A lot of pressure, right?
Yeah,
Doesn't happen twice.
yeah. So this is a 9/11 photo.
Yeah, actually, this is 10 years after 9/11. I photographed Danny right after 9/11, and I've stayed in touch with the Foley family. And then 10 years later, I went back to photograph Danny and his sister because they lost their brother Tommy on 9/11 day. And that's Tommy, that mask guard in Danny's helmet is Tommy. And Danny stepped up and took Tommy's place at Rescue 3. And so every fire that Danny goes into, he has Tommy's mask guard in his helmet.
So we didn't talk about that. I mean, you photographed. I mean, pretty much everybody. All I mean, all the how many responders did you photograph in your project?
We photographed, and in some, I think we ended up photographing, well, I'll call it over 200. I can never remember the exact. We worked for 3 weeks in the giant Polaroid camera, and we moved into that camera about, I don't know, 2+ weeks after 9/11, and stayed in that camera for 3 weeks and generated the imagery that came to be known as a project, was called Faces of Ground Zero. And that's where I met a lot of cops, firefighters, paramedics, people whose lives had intersected with 9/11. To this day, I still stay in touch with a whole bunch of them.
No, I'm sure. I'm sure. It's just it's one of those tough things. I mean, people think photojournalists or this, they're that, but you can't make a decent portrait of a person without having that collaboration and that connection with them. And to do that, especially with something like 9/11 responders, you have to put yourself out there, and you live with that. I don't know that people really. I don't know if I'm explaining it right, but I don't think people really realize that as far as the photographer's point of view.
Yeah, and that's Jackie Joyner Kersey,
Right.
you know, from the Olympic Nude Project.
She's amazing, amazing athlete. She was always
Loved her.
such a treat to photograph.
Absolutely. She was gracious and fun and humble in, you know, in the face of such gifts that she had. Oh my God. Um, and just a joy to be around.
Yeah, I mean, I never met her, but I'm just saying, photographing her doing the Olympic competition, it was just like, oh, it's usually she was one of those camera magnets. It's like you couldn't not photograph her.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely true.
Teddy,
Teddy. Yeah. 1980.
80.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah. This was when he was, um, you know, he was striving for the nomination, which he did not get. It went to Jimmy Carter. And, um, but, you know, still, you can see all the sea of signs back there. He still had that Kennedy charisma.
No, he made a good go of it. He almost, I mean, I think he came close to stealing the nomination from Carter. I mean, I don't remember. I was a
Yeah.
little bit younger
Oh,
than
excuse
you.
me. Was this 80? This might have been 76.
I think it might be 76.
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, he
Oh,
came close. That was his best shot. I'll give him
no,
that.
it was 1980. It was
Was it?
19. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um. Oh, white gold.
Yeah. Michelle Pfeiffer wearing the Hope Diamond. This was shot for
Wow,
life.
that's life.
This was what Life did really well. They could they could draw a big star because of their sense of grandeur and history and whatnot, and they could gain access to certain things. Like she modeled the very significant series of gems for this story from the National Gem Collection. And it was wonderful. You know, it was highly difficult to do because lighting her is very different from lighting the gems. But it was an amazing story, you know, to engage in because the gem wing at the Smithsonian was under renovation, so all the gems were off view, which gave Life an opportunity to go in and say, "We'd like to shoot this."
Nice. That's lovely. The camera likes her a lot.
Oh boy, Michelle's something.
Tell me about this.
Lucky shot, man. Very lucky. 36 exposure roll of Kodachrome 200, and this was basically the only image that was sharp. 30-second exposure, one speed light, and I'm pouring a cup of dry ice vapor down this man's forehead as the surgeon is using the aiming beam on a YAG laser in a diagnostic fashion.
Wow.
So
Wow.
very lucky.
No, you could, I mean, it was like you and Luis Ahoyas. I mean, you guys photographed the impossible things to photograph for National Geographic. I mean, that was, this is pretty recent. I remember seeing this recently. Was it, when was
Yeah,
this?
yeah. This was. I had a run there for about 7 or 8 years where I had one of my clients was the city of Beijing, and the I would go over to Beijing. They would invite foreign photographers in, and it was basically you were shooting for them. Um, Public relations really is what it amounted to, and they were
Oh, is
trying to.
this the year? Is this the year before the Beijing Olympics?
This was, it, you know, I'm losing track of time. I think it was before the Beijing Games. Yes, and they gave me this huge job when I went over, and I would do any number of things for them. But this particular year, when I went over, they asked me to shoot fashion.
Nice, nice. I mean, now it's like they're almost leading the fashion world in some ways. From what little I know about fashion, but that's lovely. This is oh, I love this. So this, I always thought this was, I always thought this was kind of a turning point. Maybe I'm wrong for you because it was really this conceptual photo essay um, to capture. kind of the feeling of is this the Bolshoi? Which one is this? Which
Yeah, it was a story on the Bolshoi Ballet, which was not inclined to do. But again, this was because I was on staff. I was in the office every day. I could be, frankly, a pain in the butt about
right?
something. And they finally said, look, don't spend too much money, but go and do what you want to do. And so I did. I went over and I had a contact with a fixer who was a friend, and he had a lot of contacts with the Bolshoi. It was a very tumultuous time in the former Soviet Union. And so I just used the dancers to kind of become a vehicle to move around Moscow. And
Right.
this is the roof of the GUM department store overlooking Red Square.
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm trying to get at. It's not really. It's about the feeling behind the dance, but also the mood of the country, and you're kind of, like you said, you're using them as a vehicle to tell these other stories, which isn't kind of the traditional way to approach photojournalism. And I think it was really successful in that regard. I really enjoyed it. Oh, this is in Sydney. I remember that.
Actually,
Right? No, this isn't.
no, this is a story on it was the year of Sydney.
Right.
Where the confusion might be is Geographic ran this as a piece for the Millennial Games. So this was a story on the limits of the human body. So I started working on this in 1999 and started shooting it for a debut, or however you would call it, publication in time for the games. So this is the finish of the Hawaiian Ironman, and I'm obviously underwater, just waiting for the swimmers to go overhead.
Nice. It's beautiful.
I was lucky.
Yeah, you get lucky. That's a funny thing about good photographers. They seem to get lucky all the time. This I always loved. This had to be a nightmare, though. Really, come on.
A little bit, we're both suspended on cables underneath a helicopter. And so we had to get clearance and permission from the FAA. And we hired a stunt helicopter pilot in Los Angeles. And that's Michelle Yeoh from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And she was, one of the premier stunt actresses of all time, really. But I needed, part of this story was on the title of the story was Globalization of Culture. So I needed an Asian actor or actress to do a stunt for me that indicated Hollywood, because at that time, Asian actors and actresses were having a tremendous impact on mainstream Hollywood movies. And so she got her start in Jackie Chan movies. And she's a dancer and a martial artist. And we had worked together prior to this, and I called her agent up, and I said, do you think she would do this? And they said, of course, no, there's no way she will do this. And she said, yes, I'd love to do that. She was fearless.
I mean, there's so many. I mean, not just for safety reasons. I don't really, not even considering the safety reason, but photographically, you got to get her in the good light, but you got to keep your own shadow out of there. And you got to be you're like 5 feet away from her. This is like super wide. I mean, it's like a 20 or something. I mean, there's so much things that can go wrong, not from a safety standpoint, but just from photographically. Just cracks me up.
Yeah, not too many ways it could go right. A lot of ways it could go wrong. Yeah, she's dropped from one skid, I'm dropped from the other, so we're facing off with each other.
So you're like 6 feet away at the most.
Yeah, 6 to 10 feet, the width of a helicopter, basically. And I'm shooting. I shot some Kodachrome and I shot some Velvia up there, and I had two cameras that were, carabinered to my safety wires, and I just rotated back and forth. Again, shooting film suspended in the air, so you're changing cassettes while you're being dangled underneath a helicopter. So that was, another, issue to be wary of. You don't want to drop anything because there's a lot of hikers who go up in those hills.
Yeah, I mean, I just assumed you shot one roll in each body, but you changed film, huh?
Oh yeah, I shot about 10, 12 rolls up there. I was
Nice.
rocking.
Nice. I would have dropped half those. I would have dropped 5 out of the 10 rolls. I just know it. So this is the Polaroid. This is the actual image from the project.
Yes, that's the cover of the book, Faces of Ground Zero. That's Louis Caccioli, firefighter who survived the collapse. He was running from the building. He had saved a whole bunch of people that day, and all that dust and everything was on his bunker jacket, etc. when he came into the studio.
Yeah, that's amazing. This is who I was talking about. The one who sings with the Lady Gaga, Tony Bennett.
Yes. Tony's just a very classy, wonderful man. And I've worked with him a couple of times, and he's just, we don't stay in touch. That would be the wrong thing to say, but I'm friendly. I can call his office. I just recently, last year, I called his office and I bought tickets, and I was able to get Annie, my wife, I was able to get her mom to meet Tony backstage, which is wonderful. So, he's just a old school, classic, wonderful, talented man.
Yeah, he's a professional. He's like you said, he's old school. I'm sure, his handshake is his handshake, and you're good. I mean, right? That's what just beautiful. There's the water polo guys.
Yeah, very easy picture to shoot, tough picture to kind of, negotiate. Let's put it that way, But guy though, Chris Duplantis was the goalie. He's the guy on the far right of the photograph, laughing. And I just saw him. He's actually an amateur photographer, and he came to one of my lectures at Sammy's Camera in LA, and we got to catch up.
Nice.
Still involved with the Water Polo Association.
Water polo is like the most. I mean, I love it. I love to shoot it, but these people that they can like tread water for an hour at a time. I don't know. It's amazing. Love to shoot it. Who's this?
Just a dude. It was just something I wanted to do for fun. So I self-assigned myself to see if I could do it.
So you want to give me the rundown? I mean, there's all sorts of light happening there.
Oh yeah. There's
you got window light.
Yep.
You got fluorescent light. You got light torched light. You got light under the cars. You're lighting up the flat black of the cars.
Mm-hmm.
And that's before we even got into the subject.
Yeah, there's probably 10, 12 strobes in this. There's big lights outside the windows creating some vapor trails, and small lights kind of all over the place, accent lighting, etc. It was fun. I like to me, when I get involved in a situation like this, I view it as a puzzle, and I'm just trying to solve it, move some pieces around. So, I mean, but I sent you way too many pictures. So
no, I know.
Probably.
I'm sorry. I just get caught up in these. This is a daily news type of era.
This was UPI. Yeah.
UPI, yeah.
Yep. And that was for People Magazine. The subway pictures, the People Magazine.
Yeah, that's how the subways used to look, kids.
So, and story on light for the National Geographic.
Right. SEALs.
Navy SEALs, yeah. Hell Week.
Northern Ireland. Jeez. What's this one on? The brain? Oh, geez.
The human brain.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. See, I would drop a roll of film in that situation. I'd have to shoot digital. I mean, Joe, you just do, this is Cambodia, I'm guessing, or is it, it's Africa, it's Rwanda. Huh?
Rwanda. Yeah, it's in the aftermath of Rwanda, the Rwandan genocide.
Yeah.
That's in Chechnya.
This one is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, downtown Grozny.
What a mess. What a mess we've created for ourselves. I kind of remember this. Who's this?
That's Bruce Dalrymple. It was a story for Sports Illustrated where he and his backcourt mate were playing for Georgia Tech, and his backcourt mate was Mark Price, who was this kid from the plains of Oklahoma. Yeah, he was an Oklahoma kid. And Bruce was a kid from the streets of Harlem in New York City. And they meshed together in the background, in the backcourt. Excuse me. They were both guards. They played together really well. And so Sports Illustrated did a piece on the fact that these kids came from very different places.
And this is the Indiana basketball piece. Yeah.
Yep.
Love that.
Leo Bud Welch, Mississippi blues guitarist.
You were just in Mississippi, weren't you?
Yes, I was. I was down in Mississippi photographing at the old Hollywood Cafe in Tunica.
Right. That's gold. That's just gold down there. This is nice.
I work a lot in Vegas. This is a Cirque du Soleil athlete, and built a set for him. And, you know, it's just fun. I mean, you're trying to, you know, in this iteration now, you have to be very proactive about offering up ideas, trying to sell ideas and concepts to clients.
You got to be a problem solver as well as a photographer, and you got to make things easier for people, right? I mean,
yep.
Yeah. One of the Olympics, I'll say, I don't know, Beijing.
Rio. This was Rio. 2015.
Oh, nice.
Yep. Good old Usain.
Yep. Nice. Joe, can you tell me about some of your books? I mean, oh, I love that. I mean, you're like the #1 bestseller as far as photographers go, right? I mean,
no, hardly that. I would never claim to be that.
Yeah, but you are. You know it.
A couple of books have done pretty well in terms of they've been incorporated into schools and whatnot, and you know, so they've popular in terms of, you know, stories and pictures and instruction. So the way I write is kind of the way I talk. So people have, you know, gravitated towards the books and enjoyed them, I think, just in the sense that it's really kind of just straightforward information, and it's hopefully written in a lively way.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, anybody at any skill level can learn something from your books. I mean, I read your books. I learned something. This is nice. This is beautiful. It's a portrait, and it's a connection you make with the guy. These I love. This is all Havana.
Yep.
Where's this one at?
Budapest.
Budapest. I love that town.
Conceptual picture.
Yeah. So Joe, tell me what you're working on. What's next for you? I mean, you're traveling all the time. You're going to like London tomorrow or something. I mean, you're a busy guy. What are you working on?
Trying to stay busy. You know, it's an interesting sort of up and down life, as you know. So yeah, we do a fair amount of shooting and a fair amount of teaching. So in London, I've got both going on, and then Annie and I are going to take a little vacation. Next year is, I don't know, up for grabs, as always. You know, as a freelance photographer, you know, I'll be in Tokyo for the games. I do know that, and I'll spend some time in Japan and try to get familiar with the city a bit. But other than that, you know, it's still around the corner, Ken, as you know.
Yeah. Any books coming out we should know about?
I'm working on one right now. I don't know when it'll be published. It's slow going.
A how-to, philosophy. What's the idea behind this one?
The tentative title is The Real Deal. And I'm really honest about the life and career of a photographer and how good it is and bad it can be, you know.
Perfect. Well, Joe, you're the real deal. I'm gonna recommend your last book. I don't know which one that is, but I'm also gonna recommend Ken Regan's All Access. I just recommend a book every episode, and I think
All Access is Ken to a T.
It's good stuff, right? I mean,
yeah. So, and it was sad because he passed away just as it was being published.
And it was abrupt. I mean, I didn't. I mean, for me, it was abrupt. It was a surprise. It came out of nowhere. So I just, yeah. He never got that. He never got to make the rounds of the museums like, you know, old photographers should be allowed to do.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. I sure appreciate it. I mean, you're a wealth of knowledge, and I love that you're willing to share it so readily.
Oh, no worries, Ken. Thank you back to you. it's an honor to, talk with you. You're one of the premier photographers of our time. So I'm very grateful to you that you gave me a jingle.
Well, now you've humbled me. So love you, bro. We'll talk
All right.
soon.